Okay, today I want to tell you a little bit about how grading is going to work in Calc BC. So we're doing something that might be a little different this year from what you've done in previous math classes. So previously, you probably had a big test at the end of every unit. And that test was the one chance for you to show what you had learned for that unit, and then the class moved on. So what we're going to be doing in Calc BC is, the first thing is to look in Google Classroom. There is a list of all the standards we're going to do for each semester. So it's called Calc BC Learning Standards, and it's this document. We can page through and see, each unit has a list of standards that will be assessed and so on. But we're not going to have one big test at the end of every unit. Instead, what we're going to do is have frequent assessments. So each one will feel like less of a big thing, and each assessment will assess multiple standards. So for example, our first assessment is on Wednesday, September 15th. Our second is on Wednesday, September 22nd. And we'll see how that goes. We may continue to have those, for example, weekly. And then on that, those, say, weekly assessments, we will track how you do on a couple standards. For example, the first assessment will only be on these two standards here, 1A and 1B, derivative rules and limits. And so let's say each one will be scored on a 10-point scale. So let's say the first time I test you on derivative rules, you kind of forgot a lot of calculus over the summer, you're still kind of getting back into it, and maybe you get a 7 out of 10. Okay, and maybe the limit stuff you remember a little bit better, and you get an 8 out of 10. So those will be recorded in Infinite Campus under the formative assessment category. So I'll say 1A, 7, 1B, 8. But then the next week, we'll have another assessment. And so we'll come back to 1A and 1B, and then maybe we'll add in, say, 1C. Okay, so let's say the next time you kind of get in your head together and you do really well on the derivative rules, you get a 9, but then limits, maybe the problems got a little trickier, or you just we're feeling it that day, and you don't do as well on that one. So say you got a 6, and then there was a new standard, derivatives in context. Maybe you got, I don't know, let's say another 8 on that one. Okay, and so each time we have an assessment, it'll be on a mix of standards. It won't necessarily be on every standard up till then. So I haven't planned the third assessment yet. Let's say we add in these two, and we're doing maybe this one, but not the derivative one. So maybe you get a 7, an 8. You get, maybe you do really well on derivatives. You get a 10. And maybe derivatives in context, it was a related rates problem, and it was a struggle for you, you got a 6. So we'll record all of these repeated scores under formative assessments. Okay, so you'll have a record of how you're doing on those different standards over time. And then what we'll do is, when I'm done testing on a standard, and each standard will be tested 3 or 4 times about, we'll look at that record. And so let's say maybe we figured 3 times was enough for derivative rules, but I assessed you on limit rules 4 times. And let's say you did a 9, and then you got an 8 again. So we look at this, and there's sort of 2 guidelines. First is, we'll take your last score chronologically if it's the highest. So if you got a 6 the first time, but you got a 10 the last time, you get that 10, okay? So for example, on this derivative rules, you would get the 10. And that's what would then go into the summative assessment categories. I would give you, for 1A, once we were done testing on that, I would put in a 10, okay? You would still have all of these scores in the formative just for record keeping, but the 10 is what would count in the summative assessment category. And then for limits, the last score wasn't the highest. You were having a day that day, or maybe the problem had an extra little twist to it that you weren't sure about, and it's not your highest score. So if it's not your highest score, or ... we will average your 2 highest. So for this limits one, Your highest was a 9, but that wasn't your last one. So then the second highest was one of these 8s. Doesn't really matter which one. So here you would get a 10 in the summative. Here you would get an 8.5, and so on. So what this does is learning takes time, right? And we want to reward that. So if it takes, several weeks before you really got that standard down, that's fine. You get that highest score. We also want you to retain the material. I will say many, many times in this class, nothing in calculus goes away. And so we want to reward retaining the material over time too. So if for example, you got an 8 and then a 7 and then a 6 and then a 5, that would mean, you're starting to forget things. And so again, we would average those top 2, but we really want to also reward hanging on to that knowledge over time, which is why if your last score isn't the highest, we'll average your 2 highest scores. Okay, so that's kind of all of these scores go in formative, and then that final score when we're done testing will go into summative. And you can see for first semester there are 21 standards. So each individual standard is going to count for 1/21st of your score. The formative category will be for record keeping. It will not actually count. So let me write that down as well. So formative will be record keeping. But it will count 0%. And then the summative, when each standard is done, I'll do a little math to figure out what your summative score is, will be 100% weight. Okay, so there we go. You didn't really have to take notes as we're going. I would encourage you to go into Google Classroom, open up this standards document so you can kind of see what's coming. Also, you might note that there's some color coding. For example, all the things listed in red are building on content standards from Calc AB. So depending on your experience in Calc AB, you'll know, I got to put in a little more review time if this is presuming some understanding from Calc AB, or if you had a great Calc AB, you know that those standards might go a little more smoothly. Similarly, things coded in blue are building on standards from pre-calculus. So you'll know when we hit those, depending on your pre-calculus experience, you might need to go back and watch some Khan Academy videos or something else when we get to those, or if you had a strong pre-calc background, that will just build on those. And then the third thing for first semester is I've coded a few of them in orange. Those are things that do properly belong in a Calc 2 course. We will assess them. They will be part of your grade in here, but they will not be on the AP test. So when we go back and review for the AP test, you won't need to review the orange stuff. Okay, so this is a good document to take a look at, and hopefully now you have a little more understanding of how things are going to go into Infinite Campus. At the end of this video, if you could jot down in your notebook any questions you have. Tuesday in class, we'll talk over any questions that people have about how grading will work in Calc BC. Okay.